Let's bring in our panel. Clay Travis, OutKick founder, Gianno Caldwell, Fox News political analyst, and Philippe Reines, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Strategic Communications for Hillary Clinton. Philippe, let me start with you, and I thank you all for being here. I want to play one of the sound bites from the debate last night that was troublesome, and I want to get your reaction and what you think your party should do about the situation that we saw last night. Let's watch.
Look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by an immigrant coming in, they talk about that. But here's the deal: there's a lot of young women who are being raped by their in-laws, by their spouses, brothers and sisters, it's just ridiculous, and they can do nothing about it. And they try to arrest them when they cross state lines.
That was the answer to the question on abortion, Philippe. What did you make of that? And do you understand what he was saying, what he was trying to say?
Look, I'll say a couple of things. Joe Biden did not have a good night last night. That's not just my opinion. That's Joe Biden's opinion. He said that only a couple of hours ago. Didn't have a good debate. There'll be other debates. He'll do better. It is as simple as having a bad night. We're going to talk about cognition for the rest of the way. That's fine. Donald Trump has waged a war against the English language since he came on the public scene. He has lied about his health starting in 2015 when he forged his own doctor's note. He lied about why he went to Walter Reed Hospital in 2019. In 2020, his doctors lied about the severity of his COVID. So if we're going to have this argument, let's have it evenly on both sides. But what it comes down to is that a good president had a really bad night. A really bad ex-president had a good night for the first time in 6 tries in his debates in the general election.
Clay, I'll let you respond to that. What do you say to that?
Well, thanks for having me on, Martha. Happy early 4th of July. I'm glad Philippe is here because I saw CNN reporting last night that a CNN high-ranking official, the Democrat Party high-ranking official, wanted to throw himself off a bridge, and I was afraid it was Philippe after how that debate went last night. I mean, I give him credit for showing up and trying to spin zone this.
Good answer, Philippe.
I appreciate him showing up and trying to spin zone this. This is like losing a football game 65-3 and bragging about the field goal. Look, this race is over. I've got my red jacket on because I'm ready for the inauguration parties. I'm ready for election night. If they stick with Joe Biden, there is a 0% chance that he is going to be elected president of the United States. We got the rally in Virginia going right there. As you just mentioned, Martha, Trump lost the state of Virginia by 10. I think he's going to win it this election. I think by 11 o'clock, Rachel Maddow is going to be curled up in the fetal position on election night, crying with a bottle of vodka beside her. And Joe Scarborough, I don't even know how he's going to get out of bed the next morning based on all the comments he's made. MSNBC and CNN are in full-on mourning. The Joe Biden campaign is over. He delivered what all of us have seen for the past several months and been accused of gaslighting for saying and been accused of spreading cheap fakes by Karine Jean-Pierre. Joe Biden doesn't have the mental or physical capacity to be president of the United States. For 90 minutes, we all saw it last night. This election's over.
I mean, we heard, Gianno, in the Robert Hur report that he was an elderly man with a poor memory. The video of that has never been released, and now we might be getting a better sense of why. The Wall Street Journal wrote a story about how the president is slipping and had a lot of sources. That was lambasted. You know, there has been an effort to keep this under the lid. And it seems to have boiled over a bit last night. I don't know how well that argument's going to work in the future after that. Your thoughts, Gianno?
Well, it brings me no solace to say this. This isn't about the debate last night. It's not about the election in November. It's about the decisions that the man that we saw last night, the man who's the commander-in-chief of our country, the decisions in which he's making today for future generations. I am extraordinarily concerned as an American citizen with what we saw last night. As you just mentioned, Martha, all the sources that have been on record that they've tried to discredit, all the people who said, including the Speaker of the House, former Speaker of the House and the current Speaker of the House, they said Joe Biden couldn't even negotiate with them. We saw that on full display last night. And if I was Philippe, I would be saying, yeah, you know, know what? Maybe you're right and we need to either switch out Joe Biden or we need to vote Donald Trump in 2024. This is a disgrace for our country. I got friends from across the world who are calling me concerned. How can your country have this man as president? And to be honest with you, Martha, I have no idea. Again, this isn't about the election. This is not political.
All right, I want to play this from Paul Begala because there is a lot of inner turmoil about this decision and what to do, whether the party should stick with President Biden or whether they should try to get someone else in there. That may have been one of the reasons that we had this very early debate on June 27th to leave a little bit of runway for that. But here's Paul Begala on, the perils of this. Watch.
Here's the risk. Okay, if any of them called me, I'd say, look, the first Democratic politician to call on Biden to step down, it's going to end their career. I mean, look, there's a dozen governors in my party, I think, who could be very strong candidates. Maybe not a dozen, maybe half a dozen at least. None of them are going to say, hey, let me step forward and knife Julius Caesar, right?
Philippe, what do you say about that and about this decision that has to be made?
There's no decision. Joe Biden is the president. He says he's running for election. That's what he's doing. This is really no different than October of 2016 when I believe the Republican Party was all fretting and pulling their hair out about Access Hollywood, and Donald Trump did not listen to Reince Priebus and everyone else who came to Trump Tower.
This is not the same.
It's no different than the summer of 2016 when he... It is the same. It is the same. And Gianno, look, to be honest with you, you want to talk about decisions as commander-in-chief. Hold on, let me finish my point.
All right, finish your point.
Gianno, let me finish my point. You want to talk about commander-in-chief decisions? Here's what Donald Trump forgot about last night. He said no one was killed on his watch. You know what? 4 special forces were killed in Niger in 2018. Why doesn't he call their parents now and say, you know what? I'm sorry, I forgot all about your people dying. And on Afghanistan, why don't we be honest and say Donald Trump was the one who gave the Taliban another 6 months to stay? So look, last night was a debacle. I'm not pretending he did great, but it was a night. Clay, I love your confidence, and if you want to go to the golf course with your red jacket for 130 days, I love it. Let us do our thing. We're going to do it with Joe Biden. Joe Biden is going to continue to point out that Donald Trump was a bad president and that Joe Biden is working hard and going to. And then we'll see what we see in November.
So, okay, Philippe, you're on record 100%. This is the program. We're sticking with it. And you may be absolutely right. I'm not sure there's a lot of alternatives, and that is clearly what the president and the first lady want to do. They made that very clear moments ago. Clay, final thought, as we look at this and we wait for former President Trump to come out here and talk about, I'm sure he's going to feel very good about his performance last night. He generally does. Quick thought here.
I'd like to be the first person on Fox News to congratulate Donald Trump on his re-election to the presidency of the United States. This race is over. I don't think he needs to debate anymore. I think he can go do a lot of rallies.
It's
the question
June,
now is
Clay.
how much is he going to win by? It's over. It's over.
definitely doesn't
All right, we're going to save the tape. We're saving the
States.
tape on all of this, and we'll see how this all works out come November, because we do have several months between now and then, and I have a feeling there's going to be a few twists and turns before then. Thank you guys very much. Philippe, thank you. Gianno, thank you. Clay, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great weekend. Great 4th of July, everybody.
See you in a week.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.